Good afternoon. You're listening to Gambling with an Edge. Now here are your hosts, Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Today, our guest is Captain Jack Andrews, one of the principals and co-founder of Unabated.com, who talks about all things sports betting related. Captain Jack, welcome back to Gambling with an Edge.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys. I guess this is the farewell tour, so I'm honored to be one of the guests on the farewell tour.
Yes, and right now we don't know how long this farewell tour is going to last. We when we announced it last week, in the next 2 days, we got 4 emails from people who want to be part of the tour, and they seem to keep coming, so I don't know if anybody's going to let us retire, but we're trying. So in the meantime, let's have a good show today with Captain Jack. All right. So last December, Unabated put out a new tool that some of your users have been able to use to extract a considerable amount of money from sports books. What happened?
Yeah, so here's the funny thing about sports betting is when we started Unabated, one of the main point of detractions was, what if they suck all the edges out of sports betting? Then there'll be nothing left for everybody else. And what we found in the 2+ years that we've been around is edges keep on showing up. There are always new ways that sports betting is expanding throughout the country. And as a result, there's new edges to be found just about every day. And we put out a tool in December. Now, let me just caveat this by saying I'm a firm believer that discretion is the better part of valor. So I don't want to spell everything out implicitly here, explicitly here, because I don't want other sports books to say, oh, okay, well, here's what we can learn from this, and here's how we can protect ourselves from this. I'm talking more to the players. And so we put out a tool, and this tool was intended for one thing. It was intended for football. And we found just through coincidence that this tool could point toward edges in basketball. And our user base quickly found this out as well. And there was a major U.S. sports book, one of the bigger brands that's out there, that had a couple different inefficiencies in how they were making their markets. And I don't want to spell it all out, but they were doing multiple things in an inefficient manner. And our users picked up on it. Rufus and I picked up on it. In fact, we had a discussion shortly after this tool became public going, man, if we would have realized that this was going on, maybe we wouldn't have made this tool. And long story short, our users were able to use this tool to find edges in a basketball market and do so to great profitability. In fact, in the first week of March, the major sports book finally realized the error of their ways, and they kind of changed a couple things that caused it no longer to be as great an edge there. But we took a poll and found that our users had already made somewhere between $6 and $8 million they had taken from this sports book in the roughly 3 months. And it wasn't something that got blasted all around Twitter or anything like that. That wasn't how the edge finally got uncovered. It was probably just due to the sports book saying, wait a minute, our numbers, we don't seem to be holding as much in this market as we once were. But our users did a great job in finding the edge and then sort of kind of keeping it on the down low, not blasting it around to everyone else. We make a point at Unabated to kind of teach not only the science of sports betting, but also the art of sports betting. And they find that sometimes you need to be a little discreet in how you handle things. You need to go about things in a way that not only allows you to get the money down, but also allows you to stay under the radar or stay outside of the radar that many sports books are looking at when they're trying to find what the sharp bettors are on and who's beating them. But I think we did a very good job, pulling off that substantial score from that major sports book was a big boost to a lot of users on our site, as well as to Rufus and I and the other founders of Unabated, because it kind of helped prove that there was an edge out there, Nobody else really picked up on it. We quietly were able to help our users kind of get the money, and it was a success story for us.
I want to be clear that the tool was there, but there wasn't anything at Unabated that was saying to the players, "Hey, look at this. Here's a big edge for you." That's correct, right?
Right. So the tool was out there just to be used against any sports book in any market, and it was able to. Everyone kind of thinks of this tool as being focused on football. Stanford Wong made it a very popular way to approach football. That's probably too big of a hint, but I'll throw that out there. And we were able to use this tool to apply it to basketball. And it was, sort of one of these things that kind of popped up in our community Discord that we have. We have a community of like-minded bettors that all kind of correspond with each other on the Discord. And, it got posted a few times like, "Hey, has anyone tried this?" And once I looked at it, I go, "Oh wow, that's really powerful," and it sort of kind of went from there. And like I said, I kind of preach to these people that, hey, look, discretion is the better part of valor. That's something I've learned early in my AP career, that you definitely need to figure out the best way to approach an edge rather than just blast it all over the universe. So, yeah, the tool was very agnostic in how it approached things, but it was able to kind of uncover something that people just really didn't think was possible.
So you originally started out gambling as a blackjack player and moved into sports. Did you see correlations between, being a card counter and sports betting?
Yeah, Richard, I started out as a blackjack player, as a card counter, and that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to come on Gambling with an Edge, is because Gambling with an Edge was always very influential in my career, in my personal evolution as an advantage player. I was able to kind of learn about things that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise learned about by listening to episodes of Gambling with an Edge. And I go all the way back, Bob. I go back when I would have to tune in to a internet link for a radio station somewhere in Vegas, and the show was just aired at that time. And if I missed it, I missed it until it showed up in some archive somewhere. It wasn't necessarily a regular podcast like it is these days. And I learned about a lot of new things in advantage play. And I guess one of them was sports betting. Maybe those early episodes with like Frank B or somebody like that really kind of piqued my interest into what's out there. And I found over the years that sports betting and card counting are not as far apart as people might think. It's all about game selection. It's all about quantifying your edge. It's all about betting your edge. It's all about getting the money down when you have an edge. And, for a card counter, picking the right casino to play in is a huge part of the battle, right? Everyone knows this. You got to find the games that are beatable. Not all the games are beatable.
And even the right table within that casino.
Exactly. Like you got to find, what games are being dealt. And sports betting similar. You got to find what sports have a beatable, have some kind of inefficiency that's beatable. You need to find the right sports books to play at. You need to find where the edges are at. You need to quantify your edge, right? You need to say, and now in card counting, it's very simple. Oh, it's all based on a 52-card finite deck or, a multiple of that in a shoe game. And so it's easy to quantify your edge. In sports betting, it's a little harder to quantify your edge because you don't know the exact quantification of how the game is going to play out. However, it's all about being less wrong than the bookmaker. And so if you're using sort of like we call this the top-down method, you're looking to sources of truth within the market that are sharper than the rest of the market. And when they move, and you play those lines at the less sharp books that are more wrong than the market makers, and you can profit that way. And you can quantify your edge that way. And you say, oh, I have a 2.4% advantage based on what this sharp book has the line at. And then, you can bet Kelly criterion subsequent to a 2.4% edge, although you probably wouldn't bet full Kelly in sports betting. You'd bet more of like a half or a quarter Kelly. And that was kind of the impetus behind Unabated. We built these tools that people probably don't have on their own in order to help them find the edge using our odds screen, quantify your edge using our various edge tools that basically show right on the screen you have a 2.4% edge if you bet this at Caesars Sportsbook relative to the unabated line, which is the unabated line is your market maker truth line. And and then we have various tools for helping you to get the money down, maybe in derivative markets or alternate line markets, or maybe you're just here for the education and talking about the art of sports betting. It's a lot like card counting, where you basically rinse and repeat, and you grind out your edge over time, and you can always learn a little bit more about ways to beat blackjack, just like you can always learn a little bit more about ways to beat sports betting.
I
or
was
video
talking
poker
to my
or slots or anything else.
Yeah, or any form of gambling, right. I was talking to my son the other day, and he said, you could be the smartest math genius in the world and find a way to get a big edge at sports betting, but if you only have one account, you can't make any money. Even if you have one account at every sports book. So to really make money, you need a lot of outs. And which do you think is actually more important? Being able to find the edge, or being able to actually get the money down?
Well, you know my answer to that, Richard, because this is something I learned from Gambling with an Edge for years, because you're the guy that I think put this into everyone's consciousness the most over the years, has been your old saying of it's the gold mine that nobody's figured out how to get the gold out of yet, or you can have the science of something, but the art of it is trying to get the money down. So absolutely, getting the money down is big. And just like a card counter, they don't ever just play at one casino. That's no way to have a career or even a side hustle as a card counter. You need to go around and find where the games are, find the better games. Just like a sports book, a sports bettor, you need to be able to shop around, find the ideal line. We talk about the landmark book, The Logic of Sports Betting, by Ed Miller and Matt Davidell. And what they kind of put in everybody's head with that book was this idea of synthetic hold, where your disadvantage against the sports book is only as great as the best line at multiple different sports books. And so if you have one shop that has -7, -110, and you have another shop that has +7, -105, well, then you've already kind of lowered the synthetic hold, because you're not betting into a 4.5% disadvantage. You're betting into more like a 3.2% disadvantage. And if you get enough sports books and you shop enough lines, you can find that synthetic hold gets lower and lower. Look, we're into baseball season now, and baseball is probably the king sport of synthetic hold being low. You can shop around, and you can basically find no more than a 1% disadvantage when it comes to betting baseball based on the best line available at multiple books. Now, you're still betting into a disadvantage, which for many of your listeners is not something they want to do. But when you have that many different options, you sometimes have a synthetic house edge that goes against the casino and as an advantage for the player. And you can get into arbitrage betting that way. And you can get into situations where you have the edge over multiple books and zero risk. There's a lot of bettors that love that. And yeah, getting the money down is the hardest part. But if you can kind of get this large stable of sports books that you can play at, maybe you're in a good state for sports betting, like Colorado, New Jersey, and some others. Ohio's kind of an up-and-coming state. You have a lot of options. And then if you don't have a lot of options, well, you always have friends, right? And maybe you have friends that are willing to put a bet down for you at a sports book that they have access to. And you can kind of work as a team that way. A little bit of a division of labor, right? You come up with the plays, maybe using a site like Unabated, and you send them out to your friends, and they get the bets down. And you kind of group all your funds together, and pretty soon you find that you're a pretty good little mini syndicate there attacking sports betting.
How do you see sports betting in 5 years or 10 years from now?
That's a big question that I think a lot of people are trying to approach, both people in the industry as well as advantage players who want to know what's the next wave. I've talked about that in the past. It's like you always need to be looking at what's coming next when it comes to any form of advantage play. And so if you're able to have a crystal ball and you don't want to use it to find out who's going to win the World Series this year, but you want to use it for, where is this industry headed, you kind of have to look at what we've seen in other countries that are a little bit further along the evolutionary scale than the United States is. And what we've seen is that sports betting tends to give way to fewer operators. I think there's going to be more consolidation as some of the smaller operators just don't see the profit in the relatively low margin of sports betting. And we've seen that sportsbook operators tend to, because of that low margin, tend to dream up ways to get more of your money. So they're dreaming up things like the single game parlay where, the edge is significantly higher, or they want to talk you into playing micro betting where you're betting on like each at bat or even each pitch of a baseball game, each drive of a football game. And they tend to pack a lot more theoretical hold into those markets. But the ultimate goal of any sportsbook operator in the United States right now is to get you towards their forthcoming internet casino. And many of you that are listening to this right now in the United States, you're like, well, my state has sports betting, but they don't have internet casinos. Trust me, they will. They absolutely will. That's the end game here of all of this push towards legalization of sports betting. They want to get to the point where people are going to be using their internet casino. And why? Is because the frequency of betting in an internet casino is so much higher than sports betting. You can make a bet on a football game, and you can sit down and watch that football game, and you have your nice little sweat there for 3 hours. Whereas if you sit down at a slot machine and you make a bet, you're still not sitting there enjoying the machine 3 hours later. Your spin was done in 6 seconds. And you can make 10 of those bets in a minute. And you can make, 600 bets in an hour. And that's far more advantageous for the casino, for the house, to take your money from you by having you bet into these markets again and again and again more frequently. So they want to kind of get us to the point where we're playing in their internet casinos. Now, do internet casinos offer any edge for the advantage player? It's yet to be seen. Like, we know there's promotions and bonuses. We saw that with the sports betting boom over the past 5 years or so. Look, I remember coming on Gambling with an Edge and talking about all of the opportunities that are out there for bettors to maybe fly to New Jersey and sign up for all these accounts and maybe make $6,000 to $8,000 in an afternoon just going through all these promotions and bonuses. Those opportunities are gone. New Jersey is a very saturated state. You can still find some edges as new states pop up. We saw Massachusetts earlier in March. We saw Ohio in January, but they're not nearly as strong as they used to be. And internet casinos, they're going to be a certain wave of that. But for the most part, you already signed up for their sports book. They already have your name. They already have your information. They don't need to entice you with a bonus. So they don't have as many people that need the brand awareness. In terms of AP plays for casinos, internet casinos, there's going to be some of the same plays that are available to the slot hustlers that are out there. Some of the same slot plays are going to be there. Some of them won't be there, but some of them will. There's going to be progressives and things like that. One of the things that I think I found most refreshing about internet casinos in relation to land-based casinos is they all run on basically the same par sheet. They all have the same probabilities. And they they spell out those probabilities in the help screens. So you can find a slot machine where the average return, the average theoretical return is 96.7%, and it'll say that right on the instruction screen. This game returns 96.7% over time. So those of you who want to kind of figure out how to find an edge at online slot machines, you can go ahead and try to find that when they come to your area or you go to an area that has them. There's not a lot of edges out there for online casinos, but I think there will be some, and there will be many who profit from it.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot to unpack there. But first, I'd like to say that when you were talking about how the sports books want to push you to, bet on every down in football or whatever, there was this big problem of you try to make those in-game bets and you get the spinning wheel and then the bet doesn't go through unless you've already lost it, that kind of thing. I mean, is that still a big problem, and how are people going to be able to bet that frequently if that continues to be a problem?
So we do still have that certain amount of lag time that favors the operator. It doesn't favor the bettor. It's sort of that free roll against the bettor. Now, we've had some advances over the years. Some of the first advances have been in some of the operators. They now are trying to be a little bit more agile with that betting process. You had Alex Kane from Sport Trade on not too long ago, and he talked about how Sport Trade has kind of taken away that spinning wheel. And it's an instantaneous. You know how much money is available to you to bet into. You can bet rapidly. There's far less friction in that market. You get in and out of a position very easily. I use Sport Trade. I love Sport Trade. It's a very good product. In fact, a lot of my action these days are on the exchanges here in New Jersey. But how are they going to kind of make it so that that's a little bit more available to the general public? Well, there's this company called Simple Bet, and they have been the pioneers in micro betting. Micro betting is betting on the smallest details in sporting events, such as, will this player have a strikeout, a walk, a hit, or make an out when they come up to bat in this inning. And it's not as much rapid in terms of like the batter's up to bat and you make this bet. It's sort of like you make this bet because they're the third batter due up in this inning, and you can, make it sort of in advance. So it's not as instantaneous as you might think when it comes to micro betting. But we're going to get there, and what'll be the driving catalyst of all of that is advances in broadcasting technology, and we're starting to see that. We're starting to see they're coming up with ways to make less and less latency in the broadcast of sporting events. And when that becomes available to both the operator and the bettor, that'll be a good thing. If that is something that is only available to the operator, that's a bad thing. The bettor's at a disadvantage. And what we're seeing with a lot of the streaming services out there is a bettor that's watching a game on YouTube or watching a game on some kind of streaming service like MLB.TV, you are a good minute and a half behind what's actually happening. And the operators have access to the fastest feeds from Sportradar or from BetGenius. They're the two companies that handle most of the major sports leagues and their live betting data. And they have the fastest feed. You don't have the fastest feed. There's an inequality there. Look, at Unabated, we actually contracted with Sportradar to get the fastest feed we could, and we're pretty fast. Like, we're ahead of broadcast television when it comes to the scores for, like, the NBA. But we're still not ahead of the sportsbooks because the sportsbooks have access to an even faster feed that we can't, as a company, access. So there's always going to be an unlevel playing field until we get to the point where there is full zero latency or very close to zero latency, and the bettors and the bookies can be on the same playing field. But I don't know that the bookies are going to want that because that's just too much of a risk for them. And then they're going to start to build in the little delays like they have now, the spinning wheels. So I don't know that it'll ever be perfect, but we're getting closer to perfect than we have in the past.
I just want to point out, too, that, sorry, Bob, I keep cutting you off, but
okay.
When you're talking about adding these, all these different kind of bets, this is a tremendous opportunity for players. Just like for the card counters and the blackjack players, when they started adding all of these different carnival games, every time they add something, or side bets, every time they add something new, it's an opportunity for them to screw up or to not realize that they haven't fully analyzed what it is they're doing and that you may find vulnerabilities. So
absolutely,
the more they throw out there, the better it is for the players, because if there is no edge, well, then you just don't have to bet on those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, we're not on video right now, but I was nodding my head. I was kind of pumping my fist because that is exactly what any advantage player should welcome, is the proliferation of this industry, because trust me, they're going to step in it. Like, they just can't help themselves. They're going to make mistakes. trust me, I know of plenty of mistakes that are out there that, I probably don't want to share because I can't believe how dumb they are. Like there's too much surface area for them to defend, and the skill level on the operator side in sports betting is not as strong as the skill level on the player side. And I don't think we're going to reach kind of like a uniform distribution of skill level for quite a while, because there's just very few people that have, in the U.S. at least, that have experience in being a really good bookmaker. And this industry doesn't seem to want to pay the people what they're worth, and they can make far more money on the player side and just pick off the edges in whatever way they want to. And that's great for any aspiring advantage player to continue to find new edges in sports betting.
All right, I'm going to sneak in a quick question before Richard so rudely cuts me off again. You mentioned casinos want to get you onto their online apps. Well, in many states, you have a bunch of outs, whether we'll just say Caesars, MGM, FanDuel, and DraftKings, among others. And on sites like Unabated, they will tell you what the current price is on each of those sites. And the sites are probably 80% identical at any given time, but DraftKings is going to be better in one direction on something and better at something else. So players can pick and choose, whereas, using the online, whereas they couldn't do that so easily when they had to physically go to the sports books to place the bets. And because it's, now this is a huge advantage for the players and a disadvantage for casinos in the online. You agree with this?
Oh, sure, absolutely. It's definitely a huge advantage, line shopping, compared to what you used to have to do. I remember my earliest days going to Las Vegas and trying to do a little bit of line shopping, and I think I would maybe go across, I usually would stay in Center Strip area there, and maybe I'd get to the Imperial Palace, and then maybe I would get over to Caesars, and then I would be like, I just walked 2 miles. I'm done. I'll just bet it here. I don't care. And with sports betting these days, I can see what the line is. I can see it not only in the books I have access to in New Jersey. I can see offshore. I can see around the world. I can see exchanges in Europe. I can see sports books in Australia. And that doesn't mean I need to go bet there, and I think that's one of the misguided parts of regulation in the U.S. is they tend to say all offshore betting is bad, there's bad actors offshore. No, that's all part of the ecosystem, all part of the economy. You don't watch CNBC and just focus on U.S. stocks. You focus on what the world is doing. Events overseas impact events in the United States economy. So it's similar in sports betting. I want to see what the line is at Betfair, at Matchbook, at some of the bigger European sports books, even on U.S. sports, because sometimes there's an influence there. And similarly, I want to see what the line is in Nevada at Circa, because I don't have Circa out here in New Jersey, but I know Circa's really sharp, and I want to see what they have as their line and when their lines are moving and how they're moving and when their limits go up, because they're willing to take more liquidity on a market because they're more certain of their number. It's all part of this market, and I think that's one thing that advantage players need to understand when it comes to if they want to get involved in sports betting. If they're looking for an edge, even after Gambling with an Edge goes off the air, you need to approach this as if it's a living, breathing market and trying to see the intricacies of how the market moves and reacts. And baseball is not the same as football, is not the same as hockey. All of these markets kind of move differently. There's different market makers in each market, and you kind of have to learn that. If you want to get involved in a certain market, you don't need to learn the players and the coaches. You need to learn how the market moves and what it moves and reacts to.
All right, let's shift gears. A little bit. You've been a listener to Gambling with an Edge for a decade or so. Do you have any favorite memories? Rather self-serving.
I have a lot of favorite memories of Gambling with an Edge because Gambling with an Edge has been like an institution for me and for a lot of advantage players out there. And we live in an age where there's plenty of podcasts these days. Look, I even have a podcast. Everybody's got a podcast these days.
And what you have.
Well, the thing with Gambling with an Edge was it was always a little bit different. There was always something. It wasn't just focused on card counting. It wasn't just focused on video poker. It was everything was covered, and it really opened my eyes to all the different things that were out there as an advantage player. Look, I remember you talked about a guy that was getting an edge at scratch cards with lotteries. When I was a card counter early on, I would say, if you're playing scratch cards, man, you're getting into a huge disadvantage. Well, maybe you are. Maybe there's an inefficiency in that market. And hearing some of the legends of the industry, of our industry, of advantage play, hearing them talk, that was a great education to me. Anthony Curtis, there's just something about the way that Anthony Curtis talks about things that I always find appealing. I like listening to the guy. I like, even when I see him in person, like Blackjack Ball and things like that, I just like hearing him explain something. He just has a way of talking that I've tried to adapt and try to relate to people when you explain things to them. And some of the things with Gambling with an Edge have been, they take me back to a time when I would store up a lot of episodes because I would have some travel. And I know there's people listening to this that can relate to this. You have a long flight coming up. You store up 3 or 4 episodes of Gambling with an Edge to listen to on the flight. Or you have a long car ride. And I had this play that I was doing for a number of years that would often require about a 4.5-hour drive. And me and my partners, we would always store up Gambling with an Edge episodes to listen to in the car as we drove between these 2 areas that we were making this play at. And we always had a running commentary of the episode as we go. And to this day, when I hear certain words or certain phrases, it takes me back to be driving those roads and listening to it. And we were laughing, or we were saying that's a great comment, or that's a dumb comment. It was all over the map. So I think when it comes to Gambling with an Edge, I think one of the things I'll miss was the variety of it, and it had a certain structure to it that was very unique. And I think, Bob, that's a credit to you and Richard as well, and even to Mike Shackelford before him. It was just a unique way of looking at advantage play. And I will still go back to some old episodes and listen to them. Look, the Bob Nersessian episodes were always great because there was always something that maybe I didn't understand about the legal intricacies that Bob would explain well, and he'd pound the desk, and it would always be great listening to anytime he had things to say about the legal side of things.
Always great for recording him pounding on the desk.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he takes the award for the best pounder on the Gambling with an Edge guest. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's leading that.
I just want to say, one of the things I'm proudest of about this show is that we have had people on the show talking about ways to beat almost every possible game you can imagine. And as you said, from scratch-off lottery tickets to, craps roulette, everything. 10 years ago, if you had said, there's this podcast where they have guys on who are beating slot machines, I would have, said that's ridiculous. But, now that's the up-and-coming thing.
I would have said it's ridiculous. I said for years in my classes that you're not going to beat slot machines. Now I spend a lot of time doing it. And it's and it's because gambling, as a consumer in Gambling with an Edge, is even though I'm a host, I get to listen to what these guys say, and some of which I've applied personally. And another advantage I had, when I would get the same guy coming back, say, a year and a half later, I would frequently go back and listen to his earlier episode to refresh what we talked about before and get in mind what his individual stick was. And I would hear things that I had missed the first time around. And so when I only listen to them once, I don't like watching a movie twice. You see things, if you watch a movie twice, you see something different in the second time than you did in the first time. And so I frequently did that, and that helped my personal gambling career.
Absolutely. I'll add to that. You always had a very wide spectrum of guests. It wasn't just Blackjack Hall of Famers. It wasn't just known advantage players. Sometimes it was people that I had never heard of, and I had no idea that they even existed in the world. And I probably made some contact based on listening to somebody on Gambling with Edge and going, that's a really smart person. I need to find a way to get in touch with them and maybe work with them in the future. It was a great way to kind of get your name out there if you were an advantage player. And, there's two sides of that coin. You sometimes had guests on that, what's the phrase when I think Mark Twain is like, better to be a fool and not expose yourself by opening your mouth or something like that. There's been plenty of guests that I've gone, wow, I got to steer clear of that guy. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, there are definitely a list of guests who will be making our farewell tour appearance.
Yeah, and that is one of the criticisms of the show is that sometimes a guest will get on and we don't know all these people, right? And you think they're going to be a good guest, and then you get them on, and you're like, oh my God, But you still, we have to fill 52 weeks a year, so and that has been one of the struggles in doing the show is doing that. So yeah.
So we have more questions for Captain Jack, but first we're going to have a commercial break. So Richard,
if you're serious about card counting, the Blackjack Apprenticeship membership is a great way to learn, train, network, and get the resources you need to succeed. We've had quite a few guests on Gambling with an Edge who exclusively trained and got their start through Blackjack Apprenticeship. Check out the website at blackjackapprenticeship.com. They have member forums, training software, and guides to help you learn. That's blackjackapprenticeship.com, and you will find a link in the show notes.
Videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. Sign up for the Gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year. This allows you to get correction on most of the games. Game of the week is Max Action Poker, where you play 6 to 10 coins per line, and all the pay schedule categories from 3 of a kind and higher get bumped up. You get a lot more valuable game the more coins you play. You also get more variance. It will require learning an entirely new strategy. Flushes and straights pay so much more than what you're used to. Your intuition will be way off on how to play hands without studying. It will not be particularly difficult, as existing video poker software is fully capable of creating a new strategy for you.
Everyone seems to be talking about sports betting lately. If you're looking to learn more about how you can profit from the sports betting gold rush, then Unabated.com is a great resource for you. Founded by frequent Gambling with an Edge guest, Captain Jack, who's here with us today, and Rufus Peabody. Unabated.com has free educational articles and odds screens to help you shop lines. If you bet props, their Essentials tier has projections and simulators you won't find anywhere else. Premium tier membership adds an array of pricing calculators, in-game tools, and the most advanced real-time odds screen available. Take a trial run with their tools to decide if Unabated.com is right for you.
All right, we're back talking with Captain Jack.
Hey, Bob, can I just say what an honor it was to be a commercial sponsor on your podcast? Trust me, there's a lot of advantage players out there that I know try to skip through the commercials as efficiently as possible. So to having been one of the sponsors that people tried to skip over was a little bit of an honor. But it was good to be associated with such an institution as your podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I also just want to add that, for people who think that, I don't know, whatever, there are sponsors that we turn down. Like, not everyone who wanted to be a sponsor did we just take. So one that comes to mind is is the ball shaver. Bob refused to shave his balls with this thing. So, but anyway, so I just wanted to point that out, that we were selective in who we accepted as sponsors.
Bob refused to talk about shaving his balls. All right. Now, is anything coming up in the near future on Unabated that our listeners should listen to, should be aware of?
So I like to say Unabated is a lot like Disneyland, because you go to Disneyland and there's always something new. Now, there's all the traditional things that you always want to see when you go to Disneyland, but there's always a new ride. And I believe Walt Disney said, Disneyland will never be finished. Well, Unabated will never be finished. We're always adding something new. We're always kind of finding a better way to present something, or a more efficient way of presenting it. So we currently have an array of tools for baseball. We're getting started into the baseball season here. We have the main push lately has been towards prop bets. I think there's more liquidity being offered in prop bets than ever before in sports betting. I think NFL props are a viable play for a lot of advantage players that may have thought that prop plays are just too esoteric to be able to last long at a sports book. I think you can last betting NFL props. I think you can last betting some NBA props. And I'm hoping to see some of the same thing with baseball props going forward. So we have a tool that allows people to simulate player performance based on the projections they give, and convert a mean projection, an average projection, into a median projection, because sports books put out a line based on the median line, not based on the mean. And that's an important part that I think a lot of people never really realize when it comes to sports betting, is you're betting against a median, not against a mean. So you reach that median by running simulations. And so we have simulation tools that users can use. We also have some partial game derivative calculators coming out to attack not only first 5 inning lines, but first 3 and first 7 inning lines. That's something that some of these bigger, newer sports books are putting out there. And it kind of lends to Richard's comment earlier about they keep coming out with new stuff, and maybe they're making a mistake. Well, maybe they're making a mistake in first 3 inning lines or first 7 inning lines. So we're going to have that in addition to the first 5 inning lines that some sports books have out there. Most sports books have first 5. Some have first 3 and first 7. And I'll give a point here to, this is how edges show up, is, remember, as we're coming out of COVID, the Major League Baseball started doing 7-inning games with their doubleheaders. So if you had a doubleheader, it was 2 7-inning games. Well, there was a sports book I knew that had lines on the first 3 innings of a game. And they reached that line by basically dividing the total, or the side, by 3. So if the game total was 9, they'd make the first 3 inning line to be 3. Well, when you had a 7-inning doubleheader, they divided that number, that total, by 3. So you can see quickly, like you might have in a normal 9-inning game, you might have like over under 3. Well, they were making, with a 7-inning game and a total being more like 6 or 7, they were making like over under 1.5 for the first 3 innings. And they didn't realize it for the longest time. Like, this went on for months and months and months, where they just didn't realize that they had that blind spot in how they were creating their lines. And it goes back to that, well, what's the art of getting the money down? Well, sometimes the art of getting money down is giving them the bets in a way that they want to see it. And sports books love to see parlays. So I was going through and I was parlaying these anytime that there was multiple double headers to be had, or even parlaying both games of the doubleheader to have the over 1.5 on the first 3 innings of both of the doubleheader games, things like that. So that's just an example of, like, there's always going to be blind spots out there. You just have to keep your eyes open to find them.
But usually those blind spots are not going to be in the total of NFL or MLB. It's not just going to be betting aside.
Right, but it could be in some derivative markets, like alternate lines. And that's one of the first tools we created at Unabated, was to be able to price out what an alternate line should be. So if the game line in an NFL game is -6, well, what about if you're able to find -7? What should that be priced at? Or what if you find an alternate line like -8.5 or -10.5? What should be the accurate price of that? Because that's often where you find inefficiencies in the market. And then that sort of lends to like, okay, well, you can use these alternate line calculators to calculate what optimal teaser prices should be and other kind of promotional things where maybe they're like, add 3 points on each team's score this week, and here, make this parlay out of it, and you can find out how much that should be priced at. All these tools that allow users to say, okay, I have a giant sandbox here, and they're offering me this bet. I can kind of construct in this sandbox how I need to approach this bet, what the math is behind it, without Unabated saying, oh, hey, look, right here, this is where you have an edge by doing this. You can kind of find your edge yourself. You can, teach the person to fish rather than just feed them a fish.
Yeah, I enjoyed one of the things I just hadn't figured out so much. What you just said was you found this edge, and so you parlayed it 2 edges together, partly to disguise that that's where the edge was. Just hit each of the edges individually, it would be a lot clearer to the sports book exactly where your edge was. But when you're parlaying it, for one thing, you hit less often, but for bigger amounts. But it's this disguise feature. And video poker players need to disguise themselves all the time. And that was an area that I didn't realize that sports bettors did.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, look, when you are betting an edge and you are kind of identified as a sharp bettor, they're going to say, like, hey, what is this guy doing? What is Richard, in your book, Gambling Wizards, still one of my favorite books, you mentioned you were talking, was in I think the Doyle Brunson part of the book, and I think you asked him, do you ever do anything else, like card counting or something like that? And Doyle's like, well, if the casino were to see me at a blackjack table, they're going to say, what's Dolly doing at the blackjack table? He must have an edge at the blackjack table. What do we got going on there? Similarly, like, if somebody knew who Richard Munchkin was and saw him doing this at a casino, they go, well, he clearly has an edge. He wouldn't play a game that doesn't have an edge. So sometimes you need to disguise who you are to the casino, even when they don't see you. Even like in a sportsbook operator online, they don't see you. They just see the name, and you kind of throw them off the scent. And maybe that means you're making a lot of parlays in your first 10, 20 bets at a sports book. Elihu Foystel mentioned that when he was on your show a while back. Maybe you're using, look, parlays increase variance, right? But round robins are a very popular way to do parlay bets, and they actually reduce variance of parlay bets because they basically take all the permutations of a parlay between multiple teams. And so sportsbooks see somebody making a round robin bet, and they go, this guy's he's like an action junkie. He's just looking for action on all these different parlay options. And sometimes like that's actually good for the advantage player because you're making the parlay bet, but you're also lowering your variance. So sometimes round robins are a good way to approach it that looks square, but you're actually being sharp. Many different ways that you can be in a sports book, finding your bets, and still come across as somebody who doesn't have an edge.
I want to make 2 points. One is that variance is really good for the players. And to give you an example from video poker, there are people who, if they hit a $1,250 jackpot, they will hit the double up feature because it means that their expectation is exactly the same, but half the time they're only getting half as many W2G. So yes, it means that you may lose that $1,250 half the time, but the other half you're going to get $2,500. But you've gotten one less W2G out of it, which eats up your time sitting there at the machine. Also, it's much more likely for you to look like a loser, right? It's much better to have a player that loses small, and then one day he hits $20,000 on some big hit. That looks like a degenerate gambler to the casino. The other thing is, if your edge is big enough, then there are times where you could make parlays on things that where you have your big edge, but the other legs of the parlay maybe don't even have an edge at all. but your edge is so big on the one that you're trying to disguise that it's okay to take that, even if it's small negative on those things, to hide what it is you're doing.
Yeah, that's
I know
great
some
advice.
people,
I agree.
Some people would just like hate the idea of doing anything negative, but if you have something that's really, really strong, well, it's okay to give away some money in what I would call advertising. Like for example, you tip a lot when you have a really good hole card game. You can afford it, and it helps.
Speaking of tipping, the play that Richard mentioned of doubling up when you get a $1,250 WTG, you're only tipping half the time. So even if it's the same EV on the play, tip on every W2G, you're only tipping half the time. And so for most people, a tip on 2,500 and a tip on 1,250 would be their same minimal amount for tipping. Cut your tipping cost in half, which definitely positive EV.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end of our hour. Since this is going to be likely your last trip on Gambling with an Edge, do you have any last words for our listeners?
I just want to say thank you. Like I mentioned, you have been very influential in my journey as an Advantage player, and not just you, Bob, but the show and the topic of the show and how the show has kind of been there week after week over the years. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is I still remember the first time I was asked to come on. I probably spent 12 to 15 hours writing out all of my replies and then memorizing all my replies so it wouldn't sound like I was reading anything. I've been on subsequent times since then, and occasionally it'll just be I just kind of send a couple notes saying, oh, here's a topic that I could talk about, and then we just wing it. So it's come a long way since the early days when I had to memorize what was like 6 pages of typed notes that I wanted to sound authentic without sounding like I was reading it.
Yes.
Well, thank you. You've been a great guest over the years.
Yes, and very great guest, and I'm glad to have become your friend over the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years. It was, I appreciate that.
Definitely.
All right. At the end of the show, we have recommended. Richard, you have a recommended for our listeners.
My recommended this week is a podcast called People I Mostly Admire. And I've recommended this podcast in the past, different particular guests. It's an interview podcast with Steve Levitt, who wrote Freakonomics, one of the authors of Freakonomics. And this week, the guest, I think it was this week, maybe last week, is Dr. Peter Attia. And he has done a deep dive into the study of longevity. And so the interview is about longevity and the things you can do to live longer. And he has a new book out called Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity. And the interview was fascinating, because Levitt is an economist. There's a lot of stats in there as opposed to, I think you should eat more, whatever. So anyway, I have ordered the book. I haven't read the book yet, but the podcast was fascinating. And if you're at all interested in health and longevity, I would recommend you listen to it. And then you will know very quickly whether it's a book you're interested in reading. And it's one I certainly am.
Yeah, and I've spoken about longevity a number of times about my search for that. And I have a new author on the subject. His name is Dan Buettner, Buetner. He has 2 or 3 books. They all have blue zones in the title. And a blue zone is an area where there's a high proportion of 100-year-old plus people living. And there's some in the Pacific, there's some in California, and there's some in Central America, and there's some in Mediterranean area. And his books discover what they have in common, how you can apply those lessons to wherever you're living. And so I'm kind of simultaneously reading two of his books, The Blue Zone Solution and The Blue Zone by itself. And then he has another one on Blue Zone Recipe. And so I'm not finished with him yet, but I'm enjoying what I'm reading. And so it's same general subject as what Richard's talking about. I wasn't going to have it recommended until he said that, and then it's gone, oh, yeah? Well, I can talk about that. So, Captain Jack, do you have a recommended for our listeners?
I do, but after this love fest that I've had over the past hour with you guys, it's going to sound a little repetitive, but honestly, the archives of Gambling with an Edge. Like, there are some great things to discover. Any Bob Nersessian episode, any Russell Fox episode, any Anthony Curtis episode, any Frank B episode. Like, those are some of the tops that you know you're going to get quality information, and it's going to be entertaining. And even in the case of Russell Fox with the tax stuff, it's still knowledgeable information. And if you go some of the deeper cuts that I found the most interesting, small cap growth, when you guys had him on, that's a hilarious episode or two. The episode with Prax and the episodes with Phoenix, look those up. I'm not saying they're going to be the best thing you ever heard, but they're entertaining. I'll leave it at that. So I look forward to going back in the archives from time to time in the future when I feel like I need a little Bob and Richard fix and listening to some of those old episodes.
Well, thank you. This is a love fest. We're having a nice little bromance here on our farewell tour. Thank you very much, Jack. Good luck with future of Unabated. Thank you very much, Richard. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.